Today we're going to be talking about something a little different. This book called Disaster Memorials and Monuments: History, Context, and Practice from Around the World. The author, Kjell Brataas, really takes us on this journey through the history and the principles and the actual practice of creating these memorials. And he does it with a global lens. So we're not just talking about, memorials in the US or in Europe. We're talking about examples from New Zealand, Canada, the US, Sahara, Chile, Japan, South Korea, all over the map, yeah. And it's not just about the physical structures themselves, but the stories behind them, the choices that were made in their creation, and the impact that they have on the communities they serve.
I was going to say, it's interesting that you mentioned the choices involved, because the book seems to tackle some of the more, the more complicated aspect. Things like, how do you navigate all these different perspectives in a community that has, gone through something horrible?
One thing that struck me about the book's description is this emphasis on placemaking.
And I think it gets at the heart of why this book is so relevant. So placemaking, in the context of disaster memorials, it's really about creating spaces that foster a sense of connection, not just to the past, but to the present and even the future. It's about integrating the memorial into the fabric of the community, making it a place where people can gather and reflect and heal.
So it's not just about erecting a monument and calling it a day. It's about thinking about the surrounding environment, the ways people are going to interact with this space.
Exactly. It's about understanding the emotional landscape, the cultural sensitivities, the practical needs of the community. For example, the book mentions how some memorials incorporate gardens or reflective pools, spaces that, offer a sense of peace and tranquility, which can be incredibly important for those who are grieving.
That makes me think about the 9/11 memorial in New York City, with the reflecting pools where the Twin Towers once stood. It's such a powerful space for remembrance and contemplation.
It is. It's a perfect example of how placemaking can enhance the emotional impact of a memorial. The sound of the water cascading down into those voids, the names of the victims inscribed around the pools, creates a very visceral experience, I think, that connects visitors to the magnitude of the loss.
Exactly, and that's what's so captivating about disaster memorials, We've got all this research here, and it's like, I don't know, it's like getting a glimpse into how we as humans deal with the unthinkable.
And what's really striking is how many different ways we do that. I mean, you've got these massive, sprawling memorials, like the one for MH17 in the Netherlands.
Okay, so picture this, right? You're out in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and you stumble upon this memorial. It's for UTA Flight 772, the one that was bombed. But here's the thing. You can only see it from the air. Like, imagine that. The grief is so huge, so spread out, that it takes a memorial like that to even come close to expressing it.
It really makes you think about how we try to make remembrance a real physical thing, doesn't it? And how the way we choose to do that, like building a memorial only visible by plane, really reflects what happened.
But then, you read about this tiny plaque tucked away in London, remembering just one person who died in a terror attack. And it's just as powerful.
Looking at all these sources, they do seem to agree on a few key reasons why we create these memorials at all. It's about having a place for the grief, where people can come together and kind of share the burden of mourning.
And to learn from it, so it doesn't happen again. I read about the South Canyon Fire Memorial in Colorado, and it just blew me away. It's intentionally rough, difficult to get around. They designed it that way so that when people visit, they get a sense of what those firefighters went through.
And then there's the Sandy Hook Memorial, where they actually incorporated ashes from objects that were sent in from all around the world.
And then there are the 2011 terrorist attacks in Norway, a tragedy that hit much closer to home for Brataas. And he was directly involved in the crisis response and witnessed firsthand the impact of the attacks on his own community.
He writes about the challenges of navigating those deeply personal emotions while also trying to fulfill his professional responsibilities. He had to balance his own grief with the need to provide support and guidance to others. But the question is, how do we make sure every story is heard, that every life is honored, no matter where it was lived or how widely it was reported?
So how do we even begin to build a memorial that can do that? Capture those individual stories, but also acknowledge this bigger context.
Well, it's definitely not easy. The research talks about how it happens in stages, and it starts with talking to everyone involved, families, survivors, experts, the community, really anyone who's been touched by what happened.
It's about making sure everyone has a voice, that everyone feels heard.
And once you have that, then you can start thinking about the concept. What will the memorial actually look like? What message should it send? Where should it be?
And then there's all the practical stuff, finding the money, building it, putting the names on it, planning the opening ceremony. It's a huge undertaking, and so much emotion goes into it. I read that for the 9/11 memorial, they got over 5,000 proposals.
It just shows how much people care about getting these spaces right, creating something truly meaningful, something that will last.
And even then, the work doesn't stop, does it? We've been talking about designing and building these memorials, but what about taking care of them in the long run?
That's something that often gets overlooked. Some memorials, like the ones for Port Hueneme or MH17, they have amazing community support. People feel so connected to them, they take it upon themselves to look after them, to make sure those memories are kept alive.
It's like those memorials become a part of the community itself, not just a reminder of the tragedy, but of the strength and love that came out of it.
But sadly, that level of care isn't always there. One of the sources mentioned the Dana air crash site in Lagos. Families there have been begging for the site to be taken care of better, for people to show more respect for those who died. It really highlights that remembering isn't a one-time thing, it's a commitment we have to keep making.
It's like when you build a memorial, you're making a promise to remember, to honor, to never forget. But to keep that promise, it takes real effort, resources, and everyone being willing to make sure these spaces stay powerful for generations to come. The book highlights interviews with survivors, bereaved families, community leaders. What kind of insights do you think those firsthand accounts offer?
Those voices are absolutely crucial. They offer a perspective that we as outside observers just can't fully grasp. They speak to the raw emotional realities of loss, the long and often painful journey of healing, and the role that memorials can play in that process. It's a process that often involves compromise negotiation and a willingness to listen to different perspectives.
And Brataas, with his experience in crisis management, seems to really understand the nuances of those conversations.
He does. He talks about the importance of engaging with communities, understanding their needs, and creating spaces that are both meaningful and functional.
It's about remembering, it's about healing, it's about educating, it's about fostering a sense of community, and perhaps even about inspiring hope for the future.
And speaking of hope, I think it's worth mentioning that Brataas, despite his firsthand experience with some of the world's most horrific tragedies, maintains a sense of optimism in his work. He sees memorials not just as testaments to loss, but as symbols of resilience, as reminders of the human capacity for compassion, empathy, and rebuilding.
So we were just talking about how Brataas' firsthand experiences, with tragedy might have shaped his perspective on memorialization. And, it's one thing to study these things from an academic standpoint, but to have actually been on the ground dealing with the immediate aftermath of, such horrific event, that must bring a whole other level of understanding.
Absolutely. And in the book's introduction, Brataas talks about his work in Thailand
Oh.
after the 2004 tsunami. And he describes, the overwhelming devastation, the sheer scale of loss, and the immense challenge of identifying victims and helping families find closure. He also emphasizes the importance of involving survivors and bereaved families in the memorialization process, ensuring that their voices are heard and their needs are met.
I think we've given our listener a lot to ponder as they embark on their journey through Brataas' book.
I agree. It's a rich and thought-provoking exploration of a topic that's both timely and timeless. I have no doubt they'll find it both informative and deeply moving.